I remember precisely where I was, even down to the very seat that I was sitting at and sitting in, the day when the veneer of invulnerability shattered. Oh, there were definitely already some cracks in that veneer. I think the first one came when I was a junior in high school, and 3 of my classmates died in car accidents. And then my senior year, another one died from a drug overdose. And then there was that big crack that happened in 1986, when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, and when teacher Krista McCullough from my father's hometown of Framingham and her 6 crew members perished in the deep blue as we watched on national TV. Yet the veneer was still intact. And then 10 years ago on this very day, I was sitting in a conference room in Arlington, Virginia. I was living and working there at the time. A secretary knocked on the door and interrupted us and let us know that a plane had hit one of the Twin Towers in New York. We kind of looked at each other, didn't know what to think, went on with our business. A couple minutes later, another knock at the door, interrupted again, and we were told that the second plane had hit that tower. Those of us in the office that day gathered around that one small TV, and we were in shock. And then we got the third strike, the final blow in a sense, that we'd heard the Pentagon, which was but 10 minutes down the road from us, had also been hit. I had friends, good friends, that worked there, and doubts and questions began to invade my mind. And I can remember now, just as vividly as I can see your faces and I'm alive now, I can remember sitting there in that chair, slumped in that chair, and as I listened to those F-16s fly overhead, and I watched the Pentagon burn, and then the 2 towers collapse, that mirage of invulnerability vanished, and many things I took for granted were no longer. That's my story. I know if we had time to open up the mic, each one of you could tell a story of where you were that day and the impact it had on your life. 9/11 shattered many of our perceived notions on life. Things we always had assumed to be true turned out to be delusions. The events of that day caused many of us to question things that we previously had taken for granted. As a minister, I've spent countless hours with people who are struggling and wrestling with the biggest question, the why question. In the face of loss and tragedy and injustice, people asking, whether they speak it or it's definitely in their soul, why would God allow this to happen? It's the elephant in the room when I meet with those families. And to a great degree, it's an elephant in the room when we commemorate a national tragedy like this today. Like all ministers or spiritual guides, when I've been with these families, I scramble. I try to say something to respond, and I always come away feeling inadequate. And that, I just couldn't say what needs to be said to get to the wound. And if I'm honest with you, it's not going to be too different today as well. Yet we cannot shrink back from the task of responding to that question. Because the very best way that you and I can honor those who perished is to live confident and productive lives. We must not allow ourselves to be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good, as the scriptures say. And the only way to do that is to actually be able to face that question, that why question. We need to have the strength to face a world filled with constant loss and even devastation. So where do we get that strength? Where do we get that strength? How do we deal with this question? I'd like to propose to you, I don't have all the answers, but I'd like to propose to you, though I don't think we're going to get all that we want, we may get some of what we need in 3 ways. First, by recognizing the problem for what it is, and then by grasping an empowering hint from the past and empowering hope from the future. So first, we have to recognize this problem of tragedy, injustice, and suffering. It's a problem for everyone, no matter what their beliefs are, no matter what your beliefs are. Now, if you believe in God and for the first time experience or see horrendous evil, you rightly believe that this is a problem for your belief in God. And you're right. You may say to yourself, you might have said to yourself on September 11th, when a tragedy hit your life, how could a good and powerful God, allow something like this to happen? This makes no sense. John Stott, one of the great Christian thinkers of the past 2 generations, many of you know he died just last month. He wrote a lot. Anything you can ever pick up from him, pick it up and read. It'll challenge you to think. But he once wrote this, quote, "The face of suffering undoubtedly constitutes the single greatest challenge to the Christian faith and has been in every generation. Suffering's distribution and degree appear to be entirely random and therefore unfair, unjust. Sensitive spirits ask if it can possibly be reconciled with God's justice and love." But it would be a mistake, a very understandable mistake, but a mistake nonetheless, to think that if you abandon your belief in God, it somehow is going to make the problem easier to handle. Dr. Martin Luther King suffered great injustices, more than probably any of us ever will in our lives. And as he wrestled with these injustices, there was one point which he was in a jail in Alabama, and he was wrestling through these things, and he decided to write some letters, much like the Apostle Paul did, to write some letters. And he wrote some letters to ministers and to the public to appeal really to the American conscience. And in his letters from Birmingham jail, he wrote this. He said that if there is no higher divine law, there'd be no way to tell if a particular human law was unjust or not. So think with me, put on your thinking caps for a moment. If there's no God, if there's no divine higher law, and the material universe is all that we have, then violence is perfectly natural. It's what we should expect, the strong eating the strong. And yet somehow, in our inner person and in our being, we know and we feel this isn't the way that it ought to be. Why not? I don't want to get philosophical, especially at a time like this, but I am just trying to make the point that the problem of injustice and suffering is a problem for belief in God, but it is also a problem for disbelief in God, for really any set of beliefs, whatever you believe and whatever background you're coming from. So abandoning belief in God does not really help in the face of it. Okay, some of you are thinking, Paul, okay, that's great. You're going to leave us here? No. What will? Comes to that second truth that we need to grasp. I believe we need to grasp an empowering hint from the past. When people ask that big question, why would God allow this or that to happen? There are almost always 2 responses, 2 answers, and even those of us with great intentions often say this. The first, or the one answer is, don't question God. He has reasons beyond your finite mind. Don't question him.